There's a moment, and I promise you, every soldier who's ever stood on an alien world knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's a moment right before everything goes sideways where the universe gets very, very quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get on a Sunday morning when the coffee's hot and nothing needs your attention yet. No, this is the other kind of quiet. The kind where something old and deep in your spine recognizes a threat before your brain has finished processing the visual information arriving through your eyes. I was standing on the observation platform of Command Station Callaway, named after Admiral Raina Callaway, who died doing something extraordinarily brave at the Battle of Kepler's Gate, a story I'll get to eventually, when I felt that quiet settle over me like a burial shroud. The alien delegation was already filing through the docking corridor below. And something was wrong. I didn't know what yet. I didn't have the language for it. But 31 years of living in a human body, 15 of those years spent in situations where getting the threat assessment wrong meant you stopped existing, had wired something into my nervous system that no alien species had ever been able to reproduce in their soldiers. Something the Velthani called Praishataga, which translates roughly to the animal that refuses to die. They didn't mean it as a compliment. They would. My name is Sergeant Major Dara Okonkwo Vance. I was born in Lagos, raised in the outer settlement colonies after my mother got a terraforming contract on Dusk 4, and I joined the Terran Unified Defense Corps at 18 because I wanted off that miserable rock, and because the recruitment officer had very kind eyes and told me I had natural situational awareness, which was a polite way of saying I noticed things that made other people uncomfortable. I still do that, drives most people crazy. On the morning that the galaxy's most feared military species walked through our front door for the first time in recorded diplomatic history, I was the NCO on shift rotation for VIP security detail on Platform 14. That sounds impressive. It wasn't. Platform 14 was administrative overflow. The kind of posting they gave you when they wanted a competent body present, but didn't expect anything to actually happen. The diplomatic brass, Commander Felt, Chief Liaison Officer Nari Osai, the entire Joint Council delegation from Earth's diplomatic corps, were down on Platform 7. The cameras were on Platform 7. The handshake moment that was going to go into history textbooks was going to happen on Platform 7. Platform 14 had me, Private Thomas Wielke, who was 22 and from Krakow originally and still wrote letters home to his grandmother on actual paper, because she didn't trust digital, and Corporal Annika Strelka, who had served 2 tours on the Meridian Front and collected antique clocks as a hobby because, as she put it, time is the only thing we're actually fighting about. And we had approximately 47 members of the Vethra species, who had taken a wrong turn somewhere in the docking management system, and who were now standing in our corridor looking at us. Here's what you need to understand about the Vethra. The briefing packets we'd all received 6 weeks prior to the delegation's arrival were 42 pages long. I read all 42 pages, twice. Not because I was especially diligent, though I was. My platoon sergeant had noted that in 2 separate evaluations, but because I had learned long ago that the 42 pages contain the thing that saves your life, and that thing is usually buried in a footnote on page 39. Page 39 of the Vethra briefing packet contained this sentence. The Vethra species has achieved military dominance over 14 star systems through a combination of superior physical capability, a cultural framework that treats tactical retreat as a form of dishonor equivalent to kinship betrayal, and a neurological structure that does not experience fear as a threat avoidance signal, but rather as an aggression escalator. Let me translate that out of diplomatic bureaucracy language for you. The Vethra don't run when they're scared, they attack harder. They are, by their own cultural measurement, the apex predator of the explored galaxy. They have defeated species that were technologically superior. They have crushed empires that were numerically larger. They have won wars against opponents that on paper should have ground them to dust, and they won those wars because the Vethra simply do not stop. Their military philosophy has one primary principle: commit fully and escalate until the problem ceases to exist. They have been at war with someone for so long that their historians don't actually record periods of peace. Peace is listed as a subcategory of pre-war preparation. And then there's the physical reality. The Vethra stand between 2 and 3 meters tall, depending on the individual. They are bilaterally symmetrical, like us, which is apparently unusual enough in the galaxy that it sometimes causes other species to make assumptions about them that are immediately, catastrophically wrong. They have 4 arms, 2 primary, 2 secondary that fold against the torso when not in use, and can be mistaken for a peculiarly shaped ribcage. Their skin is a dark, layered material that their biology produces in response to environmental stress, meaning that Vethra soldiers who spend their lives in hostile environments have essentially grown their own armor, not metaphorically, literally. The outer dermal layer of a combat-active Vethra is denser than most commercially available body armor ratings. They have been at war with 6 other species simultaneously, and were winning all 6 conflicts when they sent this diplomatic delegation to us. The question everyone at the high levels was asking, and had been asking for 8 months since the initial communication was, why are they here? Why are the Vethra, who have never sought diplomacy with anyone, who resolve interspecies disputes through a process that roughly translates to whoever has survivors wins? Why are they standing in our space station asking to talk? Nobody had a clean answer. What I had, standing on Platform 14, watching 47 of them recalibrate from confusion to something else, was a feeling in my spine. They were not supposed to be here. I want to be clear about that. The 47 Vethra on Platform 14 were security contingent, the equivalent of an honor guard, and they had been routed to Platform 14 by a docking management error that the technical team was, at that exact moment, sweating through on their terminals. The diplomatic corps, the actual decision makers, were on Platform 7 with Commander Felt. What we had was their soldiers. Their soldiers, who had been moving through a corridor toward a destination, and had instead arrived somewhere unexpected, surrounded by a species they had never met, in an enclosed space. The Vethra at the front of the group stopped. The ones behind bunched up, then stopped. And then there was that quiet I mentioned. That prevalence quiet that every human being who's ever been in a truly dangerous situation recognizes on a cellular level. Wilkie was to my left. Strelka was to my right. Neither of them had moved. Good. Movement right now would read as either threat or flight, and with the Vethra, flight was nearly as bad as threat because it confirmed prey behavior, and prey behavior invited pursuit. I had read about Vethra psychology. I had read that passage 3 times. Fear escalates aggression. Retreat invites pursuit. So what do? You don't retreat. You don't show fear. What do instead? Here's the thing. Here's the thing that the briefing packet did not cover, and that the diplomatic trainers had not covered, and that no one had thought to cover because this situation was not supposed to happen. I had no protocol. I had no script. I had no senior officer, no comm link to Platform 7 that wasn't currently jammed because Platform 7 had locked down their communications for the handshake ceremony. No guidance, no precedent. I had 31 years of being human. 15 years of staying alive in situations where staying alive required you to make a decision and commit to it fully, right now, with incomplete information. I had 47 members of the most lethal species in the explored galaxy, standing in my corridor with that look. You know the look, you've seen it in animals. That moment when a dog or a big cat stops being relaxed and the eyes shift and the weight distribution changes and everything that was casual becomes very, very deliberate. The Vethra at the front had that look, and it was spreading through the group behind it like a current through water. I stepped forward. I want to pause here because every time I've told this story, and I've told it more times than I can count now, in briefings and after-action reports, and once in front of a Senate committee that kept interrupting me with questions about protocol, which, with respect, was not what that day was about. Every time I tell it, someone asks me what I was thinking in that moment. And the honest answer is, I wasn't thinking, not in the analytical sense. I wasn't running calculations. I wasn't consulting my training or my briefing packet or my understanding of Vethra psychology. All of that was background noise. What I was doing was exactly what my body told me to do, which was step toward the thing that scared me instead of away from it, because stepping away would make everything worse. It was pure animal instinct. It was the most human thing I've ever done. I stepped forward 3 paces, stopped, squared my shoulders, made eye contact, and I want to note here that eye contact with Vethra is considered a significant social signal. Their eyes are set forward-facing, predator configuration, and sustained direct eye contact reads as either a challenge or an acknowledgement of equal status, and I was absolutely gambling on which one this would land as, and I said, "You're on the wrong platform." In Standard Galactic. My Standard Galactic was not good. It was functional. It was the product of a 6-week intensive that the Corps had put me through when I got the VIP security assignment, and the instructor had told me that my accent was distinguished, which I believe was diplomatic language for wrong. But it was clear. The words were correct. The lead Vethra, I would learn later that her name was War Commander Teshra, and that she was the 3rd highest ranked military officer in the Vethra delegation, and that she had personally led 17 campaigns, none of which had ended in what you could reasonably call a Vethra defeat. War Commander Teshra looked at me. She looked at Wilkie, who was, to his enormous credit, standing absolutely still with his hands visible and his face neutral. She looked at Strelka, who had the particular expression she used in high-tension situations, which was the expression of someone calculating something very specific in their head. And then Teshra looked back at me. "This," she said in Vethra, which my earpiece translated with a 2-second delay, "is the Terran soldier." I didn't know who she was addressing. I addressed her. "Sergeant Major Dara Okonkwo Vance," I said. "Terran Unified Defense Corps, you've been misrouted. Platform 7 is your destination. I can escort you there." Another pause. I did not move. I did not look away. Teshra made a sound that my earpiece failed to translate. The notation that appeared in the translation buffer was vocalization, contextual meaning unclear, possible assessment communication. And then something happened that I could not have predicted. She laughed. Not a human laugh, nothing like a human laugh. The Vethra version of laughter is, it turns out, a full-body response, a ripple that moves through them from the upper thorax down, a rapid clicking that sounds like hail on a metal roof, and a widening of the forward-facing eyes that, the first time you see it, looks disturbingly like a predator sighting prey. The first time you see it, your body tries to take 3 steps backward. I stood still. "It does not move," Teshra said to the officer behind her. Another 2-second delay, an interesting quality. "I'm not running anywhere," I said, because she'd said it in Vethra, addressing her own people, and technically I wasn't required to respond to a comment that wasn't directed at me. But I responded anyway, because something about the moment told me that how I responded here, or whether I responded here, would set the entire tone of whatever came next. Teshra looked at me again, different this time, still assessing, but the quality of the assessment had changed. The predator sighting prey look was gone. Something else had replaced it that my earpiece translated after a moment as, expression, tactical evaluation of an unfamiliar object. You declared yourself, she said. Name, rank, species. Standard greeting protocol, I said. Where I come from. Where you come from, she repeated. And then she said something that the earpiece translated with unusual confidence, which meant it was a phrase the Vethra used frequently enough that the translation library had multiple data points. The Terrans come from a death world. Yes, I said. A world that should have killed everything on it. It tried, I said. We disagreed. That sentence, it tried. We disagreed, is the sentence that shows up in the official diplomatic record. I know this because I've read the official diplomatic record, and there's a footnote in the appendix attached to War Commander Teshra's post-delegation debrief that specifically references that exchange. Teshra's debrief, which the Vethra shared with us as part of the diplomatic transparency protocols established at the Platform 7 meeting, contains this passage about the Platform 14 incident. The Terran soldier did not perform any of the recognized submission behaviors. This is unusual for a species encountering the Vethra in an unexpected proximity situation. The soldier stepped forward. The soldier maintained challenge eye contact. The soldier spoke with a specific form of brevity that among our own units we associate with high-confidence combat speech. The soldier did not explain itself or apologize for the incorrect routing, or fill the silence with what the Terrans apparently call small talk. When asked about the Death World origin, the soldier confirmed without pride display or fear display, and offered what I can only describe as a tactical summary. The world attempted to kill them, and they refused the outcome. I have encountered 17 species in direct military engagement. The first behavior of 11 of those species, in a proximity encounter with Vethra forces, was to communicate distress or attempt withdrawal. The remaining 6 attacked preemptively. None of them stood still, maintained eye contact, declared themselves formally, and then corrected my navigation error. I am recommending that the diplomatic framework be amended to include a formal military-to-military channel with Terran Defense Corps representatives. Humans are unusual. But I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew, standing on Platform 14 with 47 Vethra looking at me, and the corridor quiet in that particular way, was that the moment had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel pressure change before a storm, not dramatic, not sudden, but definitive. The nature of the air between us had changed from something charged and dangerous to something still charged, but differently so. Still taut, still potentially explosive. But not pointed at me anymore, or pointed at me differently. Teshra turned to the officer behind her and said something fast in Vethra that my earpiece caught only partially. The briefings did not. Adequate. And note the eye contact maintenance through full exchange. Then she turned back to me. You said you would escort us, she said. Yes. To Platform 7. Yes. The correct destination. Yes. She did that thing again, the full body ripple quieter this time, the clicking softer. My earpiece offered, possible vocalization, low intensity assessment positive. Lead Terran soldier, she said. Here's the part where I would love to tell you that I walked them calmly down the corridor to Platform 7, and everything was fine and the handshake happened, and the diplomatic meeting was a complete success and humanity, and the Vethra are now the best of friends. Some of that is true. The handshake happened. The meeting was, by all accounts, more productive than any diplomatic observer had predicted, partially because when Teshra arrived on Platform 7 and Commander Felt extended her hand in greeting, Teshra looked at it for a long moment and then, according to every account I've read, looked at Chief Liaison Osai and said, "Your soldier on Platform 14. Is she typical?" And Osai, who is one of the most diplomatically capable people I have ever met, said, "More or less." Which is not strictly true, but it was the right answer. I'm going to skip ahead a little because the diplomatic meeting itself is well documented and not, strictly speaking, my story to tell. What I want to tell you is what happened in the corridor. The walk from platform 14 to platform 7 takes 11 minutes at a standard pace. I know this because I'd walked it 3 times during site preparation in the days before the delegation arrived. 11 minutes. I walked it with 47 Vethra behind me. Wilkie was on my right. He later told me that the entire walk, his heart rate was high enough that his suit's biometric monitor had flagged a wellness check. He was 22, from Krakow, and he'd been on exactly 0 combat deployments. He had been assigned to this posting because he spoke 6 languages, none of which were Vethra, and because his evaluation scores were excellent and this was supposed to be a routine administrative posting. He walked that corridor with 47 members of the most lethal military species in the explored galaxy, and he never broke stride. He told me later that he thought about his grandmother's letters the whole way, that he kept thinking about what she'd written in the last one, something about the garden, about the tomatoes this year being particularly good. I don't know why, he told me. It just seemed like the right thing to think about. Strelka was on my left. She told me nothing about what she was thinking during that walk, because Strelka doesn't talk about her inner life unless you catch her at the right moment with the right drink, and I've only managed that twice in the 8 years I've known her. What she told me was what she observed. She said that approximately 2 minutes into the walk, the Vethra formation behind us shifted. The spacing changed. The way they were moving changed. They stopped moving like a herd being led, she said. They started moving like an escort. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she says most things, but I've thought about that distinction a lot since then. A herd being led and an escort. 2 completely different social configurations. 2 completely different power relationships. They stopped being the thing that might overwhelm us from behind and started being the thing moving alongside us, with us, in formation with us. I didn't notice it in the moment. I was focused on the corridor ahead, on keeping my pace steady and my posture neutral, and not doing anything that might, in the 11 minutes between platform 14 and platform 7, undo whatever it was that had happened in that first exchange. But Strelka noticed. Strelka always notices. There's a specific moment, maybe 6 minutes into the walk, that I do remember clearly. One of the Vethra, not Teshra, a different one, someone mid-formation, said something that the earpiece translated as a question, directed at Wilkie specifically. What is the young one's designation? Wilkie looked at me. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. He said his name. Rank, planet of origin, in the same order I'd used. The Vethra who'd asked, I would later learn this was a soldier named Gethvar, who was what you'd approximate as a staff sergeant in their structure, a career non-commissioned officer with 30 years of service. Gethvar made a sound that my earpiece translated as acknowledgement, formal recognition, rank to rank. And then Gethvar said, still in Vethra, still translated with that 2-second delay, Krakow. This is an Earth designation. Yes, Wilkie said. Old world, Gethvar said. Yes. The death world. Yes. A pause, and then, your people built your first spacecraft while other species were still discovering fire, while your own world was trying to end you. Wilkie, who is, I will say it clearly, one of the finest young soldiers I have ever worked with, did not say something modest or deflective. He said, we had to. We'd run out of room to run. Another one of those full-body ripples moved through the Vethra formation. This one was larger, louder. The clicking echoed in the corridor. The earpiece after a moment offered. Vocalization, assessment positive, group, high intensity. We reached platform 7 8 minutes later. The handshake happened. The meeting began. History was apparently made. Strelka and Wilkie and I were reassigned back to platform 14, and told to stand down, because the VIP security detail on Platform 7 was going to take it from here and our part was done. We sat in the Platform 14 break room for about 20 minutes before anyone said anything. Then Strelka said, "Thomas, that thing you said about running out of room." Wielke looked up from the table. He'd been staring at nothing. "Yeah," he said. "Did you make that up on the spot?" He was quiet for a second. "No," he said. "My grandmother wrote it in one of her letters. She was writing about why her family left Poland. She said they'd run out of room." Strelka was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Smart grandmother. I want to tell you a little more about the Vethra before I tell you about what happened next, because I think it matters. I think it matters for understanding why the events of the following 6 weeks unfolded the way they did. The Vethra are not, and I cannot stress this enough, the monsters that the initial intelligence reports painted them as. They're not benevolent either. They are something much more complicated than either of those simple categories, which is, I suppose, true of most species when you get close enough to see clearly. What they are is this: a species for whom respect is the only valid currency. Not fear, not deference, not submission, respect. They have a word, Velthara, that doesn't translate cleanly, but the diplomatic linguists have settled on a compound meaning: worthy opponent recognized. It's the highest social distinction in their culture. The closest human equivalent would be something like a combination of deep professional admiration, brotherhood in arms, and the specific acknowledgement that you have met someone who could, under different circumstances, have killed you, and they have earned that acknowledgement. The Vethra extend Velthara very rarely. In their own culture, it takes years of demonstrated excellence to receive it. In their military interactions with other species, it almost never happens, because almost every species they've encountered has either submitted immediately or attacked without the kind of controlled precision that reads as competence rather than desperation. What happened on Platform 14, in the 11 minutes I walked that corridor, is that something shifted in how they were reading us. I didn't know this until the post-delegation debrief, 3 days later, when the diplomatic team sat us down and explained what the Vethra had communicated through the official channels. War Commander Teshra had formally notified the Joint Council that she was extending Velthara to the Terran Unified Defense Corps as an institution. Not to humanity generally. Specifically to the soldier she'd met on Platform 14. And as a secondary acknowledgement to the young one from the old world, Wielke, and the one who calculates, which was Strelka, and which was so accurate that it made her laugh for about 40 seconds when the liaison officer read it to her. The debrief was led by Commander Felt herself, which was the first indication that what had happened on Platform 14 was being taken more seriously than a navigation error and a lucky corridor walk. Felt had 17 years in the diplomatic corps, and the particular quality of stillness that people develop when they've spent a long time in rooms where saying the wrong word triggers an interspecies incident. She sat across from the three of us and looked at us for a long moment before she started talking. "The Vethra have sent a second communication," she said. She put a data pad on the table. The translation was already pulled up. I read it. Then I read it again. It said, and I'm paraphrasing the diplomatic translation rather than quoting it directly, because the direct translation runs to about 9 pages and involves a lot of Vethra rhetorical conventions that don't map well to human language. It said, essentially, this: the Terran delegation has demonstrated an unfamiliar quality in the soldier encountered prior to formal diplomatic contact. The soldier stood its ground, declared itself, and navigated the encounter without submission or aggression. In Vethra cultural framework, this constitutes a formal challenge engagement, not hostile but categorical. The Terran soldier challenged War Commander Teshra's implicit threat assessment and won. This is, within Vethra military culture, a declaration of equivalence. We do not negotiate with species that submit. We do not negotiate with species that attack without strategy. We negotiate only with species that have demonstrated they can stand in front of us without flinching. The Terran soldier stood in front of us without flinching. We wished to continue negotiations. Felt watched me read it. "Congratulations," she said, very dry. "You accidentally declared war on the galaxy's most lethal species." I looked up. "Except," she said, "they're treating it as a negotiation." Here's the thing about declaring war on someone who treats the declaration as a negotiation. The rules change. In every interspecies conflict the Vethra had ever been involved in, and by the time I was sitting in that debrief room, I'd read everything available, not just the 42-page briefing but the full intelligence annexes and the academic xenological papers, and 3 separate military analyses commissioned by the Joint Council in the 18 months before the delegation's arrival. In every previous conflict, the opening move was always the same. The Vethra sent a probe. The other species responded in one of 2 ways, submission or attack. The Vethra then proceeded accordingly. No species had ever done a third thing. We had done a third thing. We had, technically speaking, done it by accident, which, when I explained this to Felt, she gave me the look that I was beginning to recognize as her. That is a deeply inconvenient fact, and I am choosing not to foreground it. Look, but accident or not, we'd done it. We'd stood our ground, declared ourselves, held eye contact, maintained formation, and then, for good measure, walked them to the right platform. The Vethra cultural framework had no category for this. Their history had no precedent for this. And so they'd done the only logical thing, which was create a new category on the spot. Velthara, worthy opponent recognized. But here's the piece that the official diplomatic communications were, I think, glossing over slightly, the piece that I felt in my spine the way I'd felt the previolence quiet on the platform. Velthara is not just respect, it's a relationship. It's an ongoing recognition that has obligations attached to it. In Vethra culture, you don't extend Velthara to someone and then just ignore them. You maintain contact. You check in. You pay attention to what they're doing. What we'd done, standing on that platform, was walk into a relationship with an obligation structure we didn't fully understand yet. Felt explained this to me with the patience of someone who had been explaining complicated cultural frameworks to people for a long time, and had accepted that this was her life. "The good news," she said, "is that they want to keep talking." "And the bad news?" I asked. "There isn't bad news exactly," she paused. "There's context." The context was this. The Vethra had been at war with a species called the Sorkai for approximately 200 years. The Sorkai were, and I'm pulling from the intelligence briefing here, which described them in terms that I found deeply unsettling. The Sorkai were the kind of species that you read about and understand intellectually why every other species in the explored galaxy was afraid of them, even though the Sorkai had never, as far as the intelligence gathered, attacked anyone who hadn't attacked them first. They were ancient. Old civilization ancient, the kind of old where the first records of them predate most other species' development of basic agriculture. They had technology that the intelligence analysts described as post-scarcity, with a note that this term was insufficient but they lacked better vocabulary. They controlled, depending on how you mapped control, somewhere between 30 and 60 star systems, with the uncertainty range reflecting the difficulty of understanding exactly how the Sorkai organized themselves, which was not in any way that mapped to human or Vethra political structures. The Vethra had been fighting them for 200 years. They had not been winning. This was information that was not in the original 42-page briefing, which I noted to Felt with what I tried to make a neutral expression. "It was in the classified annexes," she said. That were not distributed to VIP security detail, I said. That were not distributed to VIP security detail, she agreed. I let that sit for a moment. And the Vethra came to us, I said slowly, because they're looking for allies, Felt said, or at minimum for intelligence, for anything. They've been fighting the Sorkai for 200 years, and they've been losing ground for 40 of those years, and there. She paused. And for the first time I saw something in her face that was neither diplomatic professionalism, nor the specific exhaustion of someone who had been in rooms with difficult cultural frameworks for a long time, but something more personal, something like the recognition that the stakes of this conversation were very real and very large. They're scared. In their way. Whatever their version of scared looks like. I thought about what the briefing had said. Fear is an aggression escalator. So they came to us, I said, and what they found on Platform 14 was whatever you gave them, Felt said. Which was apparently enough. I want to tell you about Teshra. Not War Commander Teshra, just Teshra. The person, as much as I understood her, underneath the rank and the cultural framework and the 200 years of warfare her people had been living through. Because here's something the briefings didn't cover, and that I only understood much later, after the negotiations had formalized and the military-to-military channel had been established, and I had been, to my considerable surprise, assigned as the primary Terran liaison to the Vethra military delegation. Teshra was tired. Not physically. Physically she was what you'd expect, 2.5 meters, 4 arms, the layered dermal armor, the forward-set eyes that tracked everything in a room simultaneously. In purely physical terms, she was one of the most formidable beings I had ever stood next to, and I have stood next to some formidable beings in my career. But she was tired in the way that long war soldiers get tired, in the way that has nothing to do with sleep, and everything to do with the accumulation of years spent doing the same terrible work against a problem that doesn't resolve. She was tired in a way I recognized. The first time we sat across from each other in the formal liaison meetings, 3 weeks after the Platform 14 incident, after the diplomatic framework had been established and the military-to-military channel had been opened, and I had been briefed extensively on every cultural protocol I was supposed to observe in direct interaction with Vethra military personnel. The first time we sat across from each other, she looked at me for a long moment and then said, "You are the same one from the platform." "Yes," I said. "They sent you back." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was, because Felt had requested me specifically, and Felt's request had been approved because the Vethra had specifically acknowledged me, and the diplomatic thinking was that continuity of contact mattered when the other party had formed a specific impression. But that was a long answer, and I wasn't sure how much of it translated. I said, "Because we thought you'd appreciate the continuity." She made the clicking sound, softer this time. My earpiece offered vocalization, possible approval, individual directed. "Practical thinking," she said. "We try." And then she said something that I wasn't expecting. She said, "On your platform when you stepped forward, you were afraid." It wasn't a question. I didn't treat it as one. "Yes," I said. "But you stepped forward anyway." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "In our culture," she said, "the ideal soldier has no fear response. The fear response is considered a weakness, an inefficiency. Our training is designed to suppress it." "I know," I said. "It's in the briefing." "And your training," she said. I thought about that. "Our training acknowledges the fear response exists," I said. "It doesn't try to suppress it. It tries to teach you what to do with it." "What to do with it?" she repeated. "You feel it," I said. "You acknowledge it, and then you step forward anyway." Teshra looked at me for a long time. That tactical evaluation of an unfamiliar object expression. "That," she said finally, "is a more sophisticated response than suppression." The negotiations took 6 weeks. I won't walk you through all of it. There are entire volumes of formal diplomatic record that cover the detail far better than I can. And besides, most of it was not my part. My part was the military-to-military channel, the informal contact, the conversations in the margins of the formal meetings where Teshra and I would sometimes just sit across from each other and talk about things that weren't specifically on the agenda. Those conversations are not in any official record. They're in my memory. And in the journal I kept during that period, which I've never shared publicly and don't intend to, but which matters to me in the way that things matter when they change how you understand something important. What I can tell you is this. The Sorkai situation was worse than the classified briefing suggested. The Vethra had lost 7-star systems in the 40 years they'd been losing ground. Their military doctrine, commit fully and escalate until the problem ceases to exist, was ineffective against an enemy that didn't respond to escalation the way every previous enemy had responded. The Sorkai weren't scared by the Vethra. They didn't submit. They didn't attack desperately. They responded to Vethra military pressure with a patience and a precision that the Vethra had no cultural framework for. Sound familiar? I mentioned this to Felt in one of our daily debriefs. The Vethra can't scare the Sorkai, I said, and they don't understand a military culture that responds to pressure with patience instead of escalation. Felt looked at me. Whereas, I said, we have 2,000 years of recorded military history that is basically nothing but figuring out what to do when brute escalation fails. Felt kept looking at me. We might actually be useful to them, I said. Dara, she said, very carefully, we are not going to join a war that has been running for 200 years based on a corridor incident and 6 weeks of liaison meetings. I know, I said. I'm not suggesting we join the war. I'm suggesting we might have something to offer that has nothing to do with military capability. Which is an alternative framework, I said, for thinking about a problem that doesn't resolve through escalation. She was quiet for a moment. That, she said, is dangerously close to diplomacy. I thought that was your department, I said. It is, she said. Don't let that stop you from being useful. The formal agreement that came out of the 6 weeks of negotiations is called the Callaway Accord, named after the station where it was signed, which was named after Admiral Rayna Callaway, who died doing something extraordinarily brave, and who I think would have appreciated the naming convention. The Callaway Accord establishes a framework for ongoing diplomatic and military-to-military contact between the Terran Unified Defense Corps and the Vethra Military Authority. It includes a mutual non-aggression clause that is somewhat ceremonial since neither party had been planning to attack the other, a framework for intelligence sharing on a limited basis, and a clause. This is the one that took 3 weeks to negotiate, and that Felt and I both lost sleep over, a clause that establishes the right of either party to request strategic consultation from the other in the event of a military engagement. That last clause is, in effect, an alliance, not a formal one, not the kind where you commit troops or materiel or anything binding, but the kind where you acknowledge that when things get hard enough, you might ask each other for help. The Vethra proposed that clause. We accepted it. Teshra signed the accord on behalf of the Vethra Military Authority. Felt signed on behalf of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I was not a signatory. I was NCO security detail and the liaison representative, not a diplomatic official, but I was in the room. Afterward, when the formal ceremony was finished, and the cameras had gotten their footage and the diplomatic staff were exchanging the particular brand of exhausted congratulations that follows the completion of something that everyone knew could have gone badly in 30 different ways, Teshra came and stood next to me. She was looking at the window that ran the length of the signing room, looking out at the stars beyond the station hull. Your death world, she said after a moment. Yes. I read about it in preparation for this delegation. A pause, the histories, the geological records, the biological survey data. It's not recommended reading, I said. Another of those clicks. Vocalization, low intensity, possible amusement. Your world tried to kill you, she said. It tried very hard, I said. For billions of years. More or less. And your species responded by, she paused. I got the impression she was searching for the right phrasing. By becoming adaptive, rather than dominant, you developed the capacity to change, to respond differently when a strategy failed. I thought about that. That's one way to put it. It is, she said, a quality we do not have. I didn't say anything for a moment. You could learn it, I said. She looked at me. That's what the strategic consultation clause is for, I said, isn't it? The full body ripple again. Larger than I'd seen it before. The clicking loud enough to draw looks from the diplomatic staff across the room. When my earpiece caught up with the translation, it said, vocalization, high intensity, complex, closest approximation, recognition of equal understanding between worthy opponents. Vilthera. I'm going to tell you the epilogue now, because the story doesn't end at the signing ceremony. Stories that matter don't end at the signing ceremony. The ceremony is just the point where the public record starts and the real work begins. What happened after? Wilkie was offered a position on the new Vethra liaison staff. He turned it down because he was finishing his degree in xenolinguistics and wanted to complete the program first, which I thought was exactly the right call. His grandmother wrote him a letter about it that he showed me once. She said she was glad he was learning languages, but reminded him that the most important language was the one you used with people sitting right in front of you. Strelka was promoted to staff sergeant. She told me this was only acceptable because it meant a private room and better coffee access. She's still collecting antique clocks. She sent me a picture recently of one she found on a station market, a pre-spaceflight era mechanical, with a face that shows not just hours and minutes but phases of a moon. A moon, she noted in the message, that is no longer where it was when the clock was made, because it was the moon of a planet that was terraformed 2 generations ago, and the orbital mechanics changed. Time, she said, remains the thing we're actually fighting about. I'm still in the Corps, still on the liaison track. I've met with the Vethra delegation 7 times since the Callaway Accord was signed, and each time I meet with Teshra, I understand something new about what happened on Platform 14 and what it means. The Sorkai situation, I can't tell you much about that because most of it remains classified, but I can tell you that the strategic consultation clause has been invoked. Both parties have shared things. Both parties have learned things. Whether it's enough, whether it matters, whether 200 years of a war that isn't going well can be changed by the addition of a third perspective from a species that spent billions of years getting beaten up by its own planet and figured out how to adapt, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But I know this. I know that the most important thing that happened in the opening of this relationship between humanity and the Vethra was not a diplomat's careful language, or a treaty's formal clauses, or the handshake that the cameras caught on Platform 7. It was a wrong turn in a docking management system. It was 47 of the most dangerous soldiers in the explored galaxy arriving on the wrong platform and finding 3 humans who didn't run. It was a step forward instead of a step back. It was a tried, we disagreed. Teshra asked me once, near the end of the 6th meeting, after the formal agenda was complete and we were in that particular post-meeting space where the work is done but neither party has officially ended the session yet, she asked me, on your death world, the first humans, when the world was trying to kill them, how did they know to keep going? I thought about that question for a long time. I said, they probably didn't know. I don't think they made a decision about it. I think they just kept going because stopping was the other option and they didn't like the other option. That simple, she said. That simple, I said. She was quiet. We have been fighting the Sorkai for 200 years, she said. In that time, our strategists have developed 412 distinct tactical frameworks. We have written military doctrine that spans 30 volumes. We have trained 17 generations of soldiers. And I said, and we never, she said, considered that the answer might be that simple. I looked at the window, the stars beyond the hull, billions of them. Billions of years of things trying to kill other things and other things deciding, without particularly thinking about it, that they would rather not be killed. The answer usually is that simple, I said. The work is in the keeping going. Teshra made the clicking sound. This time my earpiece was quiet for a moment. And then it offered, with unusual confidence. Vocalization, Velthara. Highest register, formal recognition, warrior to warrior. Closest Terran translation, you are one of us now, in the way that matters. I'm Sergeant Major Dara Akonquo-Vance. I was born in Lagos, raised on a terraformed rock that my mother helped build, and I joined the Terran Unified Defense Corps because a recruitment officer told me I had natural situational awareness. I accidentally started an interspecies alliance with the most lethal military civilization in the explored galaxy by stepping forward instead of backward on the wrong platform. 31 years of being human. 15 years of staying alive when staying alive required a decision, right now, with incomplete information. One step forward. That's all it was. That's all it ever is.